Hello, and welcome to Tartan Touchdown and Conversation with. We've got another massive guest lined up for you today, someone who's done it all in the world of American football, down under and beyond. So before I introduce our guest, it takes two of us to host these episodes, and I have Gavin joining me in the co-host chair today. And if you didn't know already, Gavin is a massive flag football fan, so I can already tell he's really excited for this one. How are you, Gav?
I'm very good. I'm very excited for this one. I will say, with our guest, we're recording early. There is coffee in this mug. So, yep, it's an early wake-up call, but really looking forward to today's conversation with Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. So today's guest has had an incredible journey in American football, from growing up in Sydney, chasing the college football dream in the US, and to help now shape the future of the game in Australia and beyond. He's represented, he's coached, he's built programs and opened doors for the next generation, and it's a real privilege to have him on. So please welcome to Tartan Touchdown, Paul Manera. Paul, welcome to the show. How are you?
Very well, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, it's great to be here, and yeah, I'm looking forward to talking with you and chatting with you all things American football.
Yeah, perfect. And all about you, which is great. Because if you are new to In Conversation With, where we tell the whole story of people involved at all levels of the game that we love and enjoy. So from the first interactions of the sport all the way up to present day. So Paul, with this in mind, what sports were you playing as a kid growing up in Sydney?
Rugby union, rugby league, cricket, basketball, athletics. That was kind of like, yeah, the sports that I did as a young kid, and I probably excelled more in rugby union. And lucky enough for me, that's where I started my sports career, I guess.
I mean, we could all guess it would be rugby. I feel like that's pretty much the Australian way is rugby, or there's no way at all.
Second row, lock, breakaway, a
Name
little
it.
bit of inside centre. Then I said, no, you're not good there, Paul. They moved me back into the forwards. That's where I learned how to bend my knees and run into people and hit, like tackle and block and stuff. So I credit rugby union with that.
So I guess maybe with that in mind, Paul, were there any particular athletes that inspired you, perhaps from the rugby world when you were growing up?
Look, the Ella brothers, who played rugby for a club called Randwick, they all played for Australia. They were awesome to watch, very entertaining. And just, I would say the Ella brothers were a big inspiration to me when I was a young kid playing rugby union.
I can't even pretend that I know who those people are. Oh, there's a joke I'll come up earlier because I'm so...
The thing is, nowadays, like in Scotland, we're very good at poaching the great rugby players from abroad. We've got Sione Tuipulotu's doing pretty well for us. So.
Yeah. I don't actually watch a lot of rugby union anymore. It's been 41 years now involved in American football, and it's kind of like the sport that's kind of like following me. Yeah, like at the age of 17 when I started, but my journey with American football probably starts way back to 1980, 1981 when I started actually watching the NFL on television. Yeah.
So was it like readily available? Because it's such a interesting sport to have been available in the 80s, like across that way. Like I would never have thought it was over there.
So in the late 70s, all they would show was the Super Bowl, right? And then starting off, I think it was in 1980, they started to show just the playoffs, right? And that's kind of when I fell in love with the game, because the actual first time I watched a game of American football, I think it was on during a timeout. And I thought, oh, this is pretty boring. And I just switched it off to the next channel. And I think it was like a Rams. I can't remember who was playing. I think it was like a Cowboys-Steelers game. And that was probably when I was like about 11 years of age. And I thought, oh, well, this is boring. And I just switched the channel and didn't even give it a chance. And what actually happened was, a couple of years later, I turned on the TV and it was a sports show, and they just happened to be explaining the rules. And they said it's 4 downs to get 10 yards. And the penny just dropped. And I thought, oh, well, that's pretty easy to understand. And then from there, I started watching the NFL and the playoffs, and developed a real love for the game, but also more so a fascination with the game as well. I wonder what it would be like to wear a helmet and run into people. I would be invincible. I could run through brick walls and nothing could hurt me. And then seeing these long passes through the air and seeing like breathtaking, touchdown catches. And as a young kid, it was just, I thought, oh, that's fantastic. How do the receivers get open like that? How does the quarterback know where to throw the ball? How come the corner can't defend that play? And how do they do that? So there's a lot of fascination in the game. And then I just fell in love with it. I actually wrote a letter to Channel 9 at the time and I said, can you guys get the Dallas Cowboys and the Oakland Raiders or the San Francisco 49ers out to Australia to play a game? Because if you did, I think that it would really help the game grow here in Australia and lots of people want to play it. And I didn't even get a reply. You're probably talking like 1982. American football wasn't really played in Australia then. There was a team that played back in Australia back then, but they were a group of workmates who got together and formed a team called the Waverley Oval Raiders. And I didn't even know about it, but they kind of would just play pickup games against people like other, groups of guys that they could get down to the local park to play against. But that was like the very, very, very early beginnings of American football. But it wasn't until 1984 when they put an ad out there in the local newspaper to say, hey, if you're interested in playing American football, turn up to Parramatta Park. And that's what I did. And I went down there and there was about 300 people there. And they just said, where do you live? And I gave them my suburb and they said, okay, go stand over there near that tree, right? And basically they just put us in the 7 teams and we started playing. And I was 17. I had to play against the adults straight away in tackle football, but no equipment. And so we would attack old couches and lounges and stuff like that. And we look like a cross between the Michelin Man and something out of Mad Max 2. We'd have part of our parents' couches, sewed up, and we thought, yeah, we're going to get these massive shoulder pads. But they would just like cut up bits of lounges and couches. And some of the guys thought they'd be really trendy and buy kickboxing helmets and thought they were really cool running around with kickboxing helmets on. And very funny stuff. Like you'd block a field goal with your head and, be like half knocked out at the same time as everyone be like shaky. Great job. You've blocked the field goal. And we're like half, unconscious, getting dragged off the field. And yeah, we didn't know a lot about the game, but we had a lot of fun, and it's kind of where we began, and that was 1984. And, in Sydney, we were the first league to really get going back then, and I was 17, and later on that year, I took a tour overseas with a group of Australians, and we went over to America. And we watched the University of Hawaii play the University of Iowa. Then I watched the Chicago Bears play the San Diego Chargers. I'm still 17 years of age, and we picked up equipment for the first time. One of the guys in Australia, Fred Burson, who I call the father of, sorry, getting a bit emotional. Fred's the father of American football in Australia. He would buy equipment, and so he set us up on this tour, and we all picked up this equipment. We're in Los Angeles, and we get helmets and shoulder pads for the first time. So we're running around in a car park at a hotel next to Disneyland, running into each other. Like there's tourists everywhere watching us. We didn't care, but we had to do this because we wanted to see what it was like. We couldn't wait to get the practice against Fullerton Community College. We had to get out in the car park straight away and start running around. We called ourselves the Australian Kookaburras, and kind of that was our first taste of equipment. And then, then we went and had a practice against, Fullerton Community College, who I think were national champions the year before. We had a few practices with them just to learn about the game. And I remember I was playing tight end at the time at age 17. Now, if you can go back a few years, I was 12 and a half stone. So I was 17 years of age, 6'3", 12 and a half stone, which is basically 73 kilos. And they sent me over the middle as a tight end. I caught the ball, which was amazing. And then I just felt boom, 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 like 4 or 5 helmets hit me. And I just thought, I felt like the Terminator when they get shot with like 20 bullets and just, and I thought, okay, I lived, so, but that was our kind of beginning of tackle football. Then we came back in 1985, and those same 7 teams that were playing in 84 were all in full equipment in 1985. So that was when I was 18 years of age and grown a bit more, got up to about 90 kilos and thought I'm 200 pounds now, It's very funny too, because like with myself, when we went to watch Hawaii play Iowa, we went to watch them practice all week. And I thought, I had a dream in my heart and I said, this is awesome. If I can get to 100 kilos, maybe one day I'll be an outside linebacker. I could be like 6'3", 220 pounds. Play an outside linebacker for the University of Hawaii. How cool would that be? I came back to Australia all charged up after that trip to the USA, and I started lifting weights and eating food because I knew I had to put on weight. And believe it or not, after about 6 weeks, I just said to myself, oh, "Come on, Paul, you got no chance to go to college, And I talked myself out of it, and I quit, And I
No.
thought, yeah, because And the reason I'm sharing this is because a lot of kids have a lack of self-belief in themselves, and a lot of adults do too. And, and before I knew it, I kept playing. Then Fred Burson, he'd bring out people from the University of Hawaii to watch us play. And then we'd do clinics in Australia with these University of Hawaii coaches. One year I'm out there playing. I'm now 19 years of age. I weigh about 205 pounds. I'm playing tight end. Sam Papali'i, who was from the University of Hawaii back then, he came out to do some recruiting. And then, the coach, Fred Burson, he contacted me and he said, Sam was watching you play. He really likes the way you extend your hips, when you block people, when you run into people. And I thought, yeah, that's because I played in the second row in rugby union and I know how to pack a good rugby union scrum versus a rugby league scrum, for the people out there who know the difference. So I was good at extending my hips and I had very good flexibility in my knees and my ankles and, I could get low and drive through people. And I was taking a second trip overseas at the age of 19 and in 1986. And they said, look, Sam's got some tickets for you when you go to watch Hawaii play BYU in 1986. Anyhow, so I turn up to the University of Hawaii again 2 years later. I'm now 19 and, had paid my own way for that trip because I'd been working full time at the age of 15 started off as an electrician. And so Sam gets me there and he goes, listen, Paul, I watched you play in Australia. I really like the way you move your hips and extend. And he goes, you must wear big shoulder pads. He goes, because you look bigger to me in Australia, but what you look now. And I said, he goes, but look, you come out here and you run a 4.8 and a 40 and I'm going to give you a scholarship. And that's what he said to me. So, I ran a 5.1 and he goes, oh, Paul, that's a little bit slow. And then I said to him, I go, coach, what do your defensive linemen run in the 40? He said, oh, if you can run a 4.9 in the 40, that's a good time for a defensive lineman. And I thought to myself, I can achieve that, right? I can get down to 4.9. So I come back to Australia. It's 1987 now. I'm 20 years of age and I'm playing and I weigh about 215 pounds, about 97 kilos. And I made the move from tight end to defensive end. And I was playing as a 5 technique. And a 5 technique, for those who don't know, is basically my inside eye is going to line up opposite to the outside eye of the offensive tackle. And I started having a lot of success. Get around the outside. I'd sack the quarterback. I was good at staying low and stopping people from knocking me back off the ball. Even though I wasn't very heavy. But then what happened was University of Hawaii brings out Paul Johnson, who later, he was the offensive coordinator, brought out Bob Wagner, who was the head coach, and I brought out Rich Ellison. Well, Paul Johnson, after his time at Hawaii, he then became the head coach at Georgia Tech. Paul and Rich was working with me that day as a defensive lineman. And after the clinic, we all went to the pub for the day, right? Well, the pub as you do in Australia. So I'm sitting there with a big schooner in my hand, age 20, and I'm talking to Rich Ellison. And I thought to myself, well, he hasn't offered me a scholarship yet. So I'm going to ask him if he thinks I'm good enough to play junior college football. And I said, oh, coach, do you think, I'm good enough to maybe play junior college football? And he goes, yeah, I think you are. He goes, you've got to get stronger. Right, because I was 97 kilos, 215 pounds. And then I said, but junior colleges, they don't give scholarships, don't they? And Paul Johnson was sitting down having a beer, and he just turned around and he goes, I know places in Mississippi that give scholarships. And he wasn't even coaching me that day, but he heard the conversation because he was coaching all the offensive players. And he said, I know a place in Mississippi. If you go there, it'll cost you $1,500 a semester. If you make the team, you'll get a scholarship and they'll pay for almost all of that. And he said, look, when I go back to the States, let me make a couple of calls for you. And then so, about 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from him. And back then, everything's like this. There was no mobile phone. There's no internet. There's nothing, right? And so he sends me a phone call. And all this happened in 6 weeks. He said, listen, I've got a school in Mississippi. It's called Itawamba Community College. And I don't know if you know of Itawamba Community College, but if you've seen Last Chance University, in season 2, they get in a massive brawl at Eaton Stadium. Well, Mike Eaton was my head coach, right? And that's Itawamba Community College. So, but anyhow, we'll circle back. Anyhow, so I go over to Mississippi at age 20, and I'm 97 kilos, 215 pounds. And back then, Mississippi had an out-of-state rule where they would only take 16 players who are not from Mississippi. So 16 imports. Well, and what they're doing over there, they're taking the best 39 players they've got from Mississippi, and the other 16 they were taking from outside of Mississippi. Like Florida would send their what we used to call Proposition 48 players. So for example, if you're at a Division I school but you weren't keeping up with your grades, they'd send these kids back down to junior college. Now, so I'm there practicing, and I was doing a good job. I was holding my own. I was going up against 300-pound offensive tackles, one-on-one, and they're trying to knock me back off the ball, and I'm staying low, and I'm giving them everything.
Yeah.
And the coach said to me, he goes, Paul, he goes, you're really aggressive. He goes, I underestimated you when I saw you when you got off the bus because, this skinny, scrawny, scarecrow-looking, bloke. But I had absolutely no fear, And a couple of days later, he come up to me and goes, look, you're better than some of the players I've got here in Mississippi. He goes, because you're out of state, we take the top 16 players who are not from the States. And he said to me, he goes, I want you to stay here. I want you to still practice with us because you're doing so well, but we're probably not going to be able to sign you this semester. I said, okay, coach. And then he said, but still come to practice. And so I've kept coming to practice, kept coming to the camp. Then a couple of days later, one of the other players who was an out-of-state player, he didn't graduate properly from high school. He had to pass what they call a GED exam, general education test. So coach comes up and he goes, Paul, so-and-so is academically ineligible right now. And I said, he's got to pass an exam. If he doesn't pass that exam, he said he can't play the first game because he's got to go to another state to take this exam back into Tennessee, which is the state where he came from. They said, he's not playing the first game. They said, we want you to bring your gear. You're coming on the bus. You're staying in the team hotel. Sorry, this is hard. That player, he passed that exam that day of that first game. So, I got cut 2 hours before the game and, 40 years later, whatever, it still kind of strikes me. But, the good thing is, I think the coach was always honest for me in the same way I am with my players. And I just said, look, just be honest with me if you think I can play. I said, I think you can play. He goes, I think you're going to be a great player. So I stayed there. I worked out, got in the weight room, started lifting weights and eating and got up to about 102 kilos, about 225 pounds. And then I came home for Christmas, saw my family, and then went back in January. And I remember now I was stuck at Memphis Airport and I rang the coach up and said, oh, coach, look, I'm stuck at Memphis. It's snowing. Because the whole state of Mississippi would shut down when it would snow. And I said, and he goes, hey, Paul, he goes, look, I've been watching the way you've been working out, in that whole semester. And he goes, I've got some money for you. And I said, oh, does that mean I'm on scholarship? He said, yep. And so I got offered a scholarship there. Then I went and played defensive end. And then a few weeks later in spring, one of the offensive linemen, 6'5", 300-pound guy, decided to quit the team and go back to live in Florida. I think he was homesick. And the coach walked into me one day and he goes, Paul, I had a dream. And he goes, I had a dream last night that you could play offensive tackle, and he said, out of all my guys on defensive line, he goes, I think you're the guy who could play on the offensive line for us. And I was just looked at him. I said, how much do I have to eat now? No question. Because at that time I was, 225 pounds at, 6'3", 21 years of age. I wasn't huge. And, I was a bit down actually because I loved the aggression on D-line. And then so what actually happened, I go to practice, I'm feeling a bit sorry for myself. I went out to block a linebacker and he just knocked me right on my ass. And then I got the shits. Then I got pissed off. I said, that's it. No one's ever doing me ever again. So when I started looking at linebackers and I started saying, you know what? You're a quarterback. I'm coming after you, right? And I go out there and just wallop them, and that was my attitude. That was my attitude then. So I developed the same attitude I had for sacking the quarterback. I said, linebacker, I'm coming after you. And that's what you have to have. If you want to play on the offensive line, and they say that, this guy, he doesn't have the temperament to play in the O-line or D-line, we're going to put him on the O-line. When I hear that, I just disagree straight away. You can be smart and you can be aggressive. In fact, the smarter you are and the more you know what you're doing, the more aggressive you can be. You just got to make sure you have balance and footwork and change of direction and all that becomes with it. So that was kind of like my mindset. Anyhow, at the end of the year, I got an honourable mention All-State for Mississippi Junior College football. And then Paul Johnson rang me up, and I sent Paul Johnson my film, and he rang me up and he basically offered me a full scholarship to go to the University of Hawaii. And that was amazing. And, from that, then he rings me up about a week later. He goes, "Oh, Paul, I just found out that you never graduated from high school, that you only went to year 10. And I said, "Yeah, that's right. In Australia, we don't go to year 12 unless we're going to go to university and become a doctor or a lawyer." This is in the 80s, right, when no one finished high school, and then because I had done my apprenticeship as an electrician, that's how I was able to get into the junior college. And he said, "You've got two choices." He said, "Look, you can come straight to the University of Hawaii now and transfer your grades back to Mississippi so that you can graduate, or you can stay in Mississippi for an extra semester and graduate from there, then with your Associate of Arts degree, then come down to University of Hawaii." And I said, No, I'm coming to the University of Hawaii.
Get me out the snow. I want to go live in Hawaii.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm very grateful for Mississippi for the opportunity to get my foot in the door. When I went to the University of Hawaii for my first semester there, which is January 1989, I had to pay my own way still because they legally weren't allowed to put me on scholarship because I hadn't graduated with my Associate of Arts degree. So I did that in the spring. So I'd go to all the practices. I'd help the coaches film the offensive line drills that we were doing. I got a copy of the playbook in the spring. I was able to sit in on all the positional meetings, learn the offense, and then I get my scholarship at the end of that semester, which is probably May of 89. I stay there. I do summer school for 6 weeks. I go home for 6 weeks. I come back, and then 2 weeks of tour days, 28 practices in a row, and it is hard work, really hard on your body, on your mind, just grueling, and yeah, very, very hard. Like we had 140 players on our roster, 22 get to start. And so you understand what competition's really like. My junior year, University of Hawaii, we had 23 offensive linemen, 5 offensive linemen get to start. Right? And if you go out there and you have a bad day in practice, all of a sudden you drop down to number 2 on the list, your second string. And so we went through that. And then when I went to Hawaii, I had 3 years to play 3 years of football. I go out there, I'm on the starting kickoff return team. We're playing against the University of Tulane, and there's 46,000 people at Aloha Stadium. And I'm on the front wedge, and my job was to run back 20 yards and turn around at the 30-yard line and then come back up the field and just, wallop whoever crazy guy was trying to hurt my guy. So anyhow, I do that. I run down the field, coming back. Here comes some crazy person, dives through the wedge about 5 yards in the air, hits our ball carrier right in the side of the head here, buckles his face mask, blackens his eye. And I'm like, how can you get a black eye? You got a helmet on. But that's what happened, and that was the introduction to college football. And played there for three seasons, 89, 90, 91. Was academic all conference my senior year for Western Athletic Conference. I got to play in our first ever bowl game in 1989, the Aloha Bowl. We played against Michigan State. And back then, Michigan State was quite a good football team. Got to play against the University of Notre Dame my senior year. Played against Brigham Young University. Detmer wins the Heisman Trophy. They're ranked 4th in the nation, 1990. We come out with beat them really badly, 59-28 on national TV. So lots of really cool experiences. I mean, if I could do it all again, I would in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Because education, academics, like everything that I got, like a scholarship these days to University of Hawaii is worth probably $35,000 a year, which is probably $50,000 Australian. So if you're there for 5 years, it's probably $250,000, and so I hear about kids now they graduate paying off student loans. So I'm very lucky and very privileged.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful.
Yeah. What an incredible line, and just like totally putting, because also when you spoke about how a lot of people maybe don't have that kind of self-belief, like it is totally just that I'm here, I'm going to make the most of any opportunity I'm given, especially as a young man in the 80s, and Sydney trying to make that like American dream almost. When you kind of first went over, especially to Mississippi, right? Who maybe a lot of the people who live in Mississippi don't really leave Mississippi. Did you find it was a bit of a culture shock when you went there, or were people like, Who is
It
this
was
guy?
a huge culture shock. Like I come from a place like Sydney, very cosmopolitan. You've got so many different nationalities and different cultures in the same, city. And then like in Mississippi, all the blokes have snakeskin boots, snakeskin belt buckle, big belt buckle, cowboy hat. I learned how to chew tobacco in Mississippi, and try to fit in with the crowd a bit. It was different. A very big culture shock. And, they used to ask me questions like, oh, do you have a constitution in Australia? And I go, oh, I don't know. And they would say, well, we have a constitution that says we're free. And I said, well, I think I'm free. I'm allowed to
Great.
have a beer in a pub. I think I'm free in Australia too. I just don't know if we've got a constitution because I never really paid much attention to Australian politics. But look, it was certainly, for me, Mississippi was definitely the right place for me, and even though it was a culture shock, like the people were fantastic, they were very friendly. They were very intrigued. They wanted to know more about the Aussie guy, and yeah, it was good. It's good to learn different cultures and stuff like that. So, like I said, I learned how to chew tobacco, and ate a lot of catfish and black eyed peas, and went in
Yeah.
Mississippi. Do as the Mississippians do.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess when you went to Hawaii, that was much more a similar kind of vibe
Yeah.
to being in Australia.
Hawaii was a melting pot. It's like Australia, and if like you know a lot about the history of Hawaii, we used to speak a lot of pidgin English, right? Because what happened was they brought in a lot of people from a lot of different countries, like Portuguese, Filipino, Chinese, Japanese, and they'd work on the farms, like the pineapple farms and the plantations in Hawaii. And they brought them into work. And so they developed their own style of English, and they call it pidgin English, where they shorten their words. And they'll say things like, hey, talk story bra, means, hey, mate, let's have a chat. You know what I mean? Right? Talk story bra. So bra is short for brother. Talk stories, let's have a chat. And so a lot of broken English, and so that was really cool. Like the University of Hawaii was, such a fantastic experience. And like for me personally, when I went over in 1986 and watched that Hawaii play Brigham Young, and I was 19 years of age, like just the tears rolled out of my eyes. And I said, I got to do this. I don't want to die wondering. I don't want to go to my grave wondering, would I make it? Would I not? I had to find out for myself. I didn't want anyone else to tell me what I can and can't do. I control me. I want to find out for myself. So, for me, being that kid who was 17 and said, oh, if I can get to 100 kilos and play outside linebacker, well, I got up to 115, 118 kilos. And I did it all naturally, never took any drugs, just worked my ass off, did weights. And, like size-wise, for me, natural size-wise is probably a tight end, maybe, 240 pounds. Well, I got up to about 258, 260 pounds, and I just thought to myself, wow, I remember when I was saying to myself, I hope I can get to 100 kilos. So like you succumb your own expectations, and so like for me, that's really important because a lot of people just give up on themselves and they quit as soon as it gets going hard. And I think, you know what, that's when you got to put a big smile on your face and you got to say, right, it's time to really get after it, you know. So
I think
be
it's
comfortable being uncomfortable.
No, I think that's great advice. And I mean, this is not about me, but I mean, I remember I had a very short time in playing contact, which is not worth writing home about, but maybe not obvious on the recording here, Paul. But I'm 6'7" myself. I went to uni and played with the team there, and I thought, yeah, I'm going to be a wide receiver. But then you look a lot bigger in pads, and then all of a sudden, slightly think, okay, you'll be great at tight end, and we're going to double cover you. And it's like I'm still 190, and then and you talk about leverage as well. And I remember like I come up against a guy who's about a foot shorter than me, but he pancaked me and just put me on my back because it's all these things that you've got to learn. You've talked about, the technique, the nutrition, the weight training, and to be honest, even just having that resilience to keep going because, we're seeing a lot now, obviously the GP flag program, youngsters in there, both male and female, who haven't really played the sport for a long time, but it's amazing what they learn when they keep going. And similar in the contact scene as well, we've seen a lot with particularly in Scotland, with young players who've only been playing the game for a couple of months. But if you
Yeah.
invest time and that energy and you stay with it, all these opportunities are wide open to you.
100%, and I was a guy who became an electrician at the age of 15 because my dad said, electricians make good money. And I was working in the railways, underneath carriages, in between the motor and the chassis of the train. I'd go in there and I'd pull out the brushes and replace the engine brushes. And I was doing that at the age of, 15, 16 years of age. And then from doing all of that, then to graduating from the University of Hawaii with a Bachelor of Business Administration with a major in finance at the age of, I think, 24 years of age or 25 when I graduated, and so like to me, I think, like football's taught me a lot of things in life. It's taught me that, if you believe in something and you have a burning desire, you can achieve anything you want in your life. And to me, like things like that, and I think, kids give up, people give up too quickly now as soon as they have a setback. That's sometimes when you got to, learn from your setback and then say, okay, what went wrong? How do I fix it? Whatever. And then you move on and you just become stronger. One of my sayings to my players is, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I'm a very, very strong believer in that because it is, tough times create strong people. And that's what happens. And so you're going to get setbacks, and you're always, whether you're a player, whether you're a coach, whether you're mum or dad or, business owner or whatever. I mean, we run a business now here at Bring It On Sports. We employed 191 people last year, Yeah, we have setbacks, challenges all the time, and you just got to get on with it, and I think football kind of taught me that because the road I had to take wasn't an easy road. But with that hard pathway there's a lot of knowledge that I picked up along the way, and I've helped other kids get scholarships. I don't know if you know about him, Gotsis. He's an Aussie who's playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is his 10th year in the NFL, and that came through my connections with Paul Johnson, who later became the head coach at, Georgia Tech University. But the thing for me is, when I finished playing at the University of Hawaii, I said, well, I'm not good enough to go to the NFL. I wasn't big enough, like I think I was tough enough. I have no problems with that. But, back then the standard was probably 280 pounds minimum to play on the offensive line in the NFL. And most of the guys who were 280 would then bulk up to say 300 to kind of, make sure they're heavy enough. It was very hard for me to carry the weight that I was carrying because of the frame that I had. Like size-wise for me, would have rather, probably been better to be like a tight end. But, so that was my challenge. That's where my college football career ended. I didn't go to the NFL, but I had this burning desire to come back to Australia and share what I achieved with the sport here and really help it grow. And that was where I was probably emotionally connected to that, and I probably could have stayed in the States and coached over there if I wanted to, because I did a semester, working with Kenani Matalolo, who's now the head coach at San Jose State. Well, before that, he was the head coach of the Navy Academy, and also Mike Seawalk. Mike went to Georgia Tech and coached there for a number of years with Paul Johnson. And, so what I did is when I finished playing, I said to Bob Wagner, who was the head coach, and I said, look, I want to go back to Australia and coach football. Can I be a student assistant coach? And he said, yes, you can. He goes, this is great news. He said, Ken Matalolo, who used to play quarterback for us and has been a graduate assistant for the last 2 years. We've just hired him as an offensive line coach. You can assist Kenny and you can help Kenny with offensive line. So I would we would set up the drills for spring football. So I would help coach, and then we'd go back and we'd watch film, and there's me and Kenny sitting there, and Kenny would say, look, on this play here, what do we do, Paul? Do we give that offensive lineman a plus or a minus? And I said, look, give him a plus, but tell him to take a better first step. So I'm helping Kenny learn O-line, and then, Kenny comes back to Australia and stays at my house. He's on a recruiting trip now, and there was another kid there, Nick. I can't remember his surname, but, Kenny helped us then set Nick up to get a scholarship to a junior college in California. And that's kind of, what happened. And then I come back to Australia, I start coaching. I was pretty insane when I first started coaching because I was so full of football was like the military. Yeah. Like if practice started at 7, everyone better be out there ready to go at 5 minutes to 7. Whereas come back to Australia, 7 o'clock, there's, bloke having a cigarette in a car park, putting on his, football pants. And I'm like, hey, training started like 5 minutes ago, So, they didn't really like me at first when I first came back, from the US, because I was just full of that energy. I was 25 years of age. I'd just been through a system where like it's tough. You're working it hard every day and you're going all year round and, there's 140 people on the team, 22 get to start. And that's what I came from. Right. And so it was really hard for me to adjust at first. I was
Yeah.
just young and immature and I thought I'm going to come back to Australia and everyone's going to want to listen and learn from me. And, but they didn't, they just want to play. And
Yeah.
I'm more adjusted to it now than what it was when I first came back. And I get it now. I get it. They just want to go bowling on Saturday night. They want to get their ball and they want to bowl it down and get a strike and come home. They don't want some guru coming along telling them how to hold the ball properly, how to stand and step and this and that. They just want to play. And for a big part of it that's still how it is today. People want to play and enjoy themselves and have fun. And I get that. And I'm totally fine with it. But back then it was different for me. I was trying to probably just change things and make it to what I was used to in America.
Yeah.
But
Paul, did you find when you came back, because obviously you've been away consistently for like 5 years, like at this point when you first came back to Australia, what was the kind of mood around like the NFL? Had it like changed? Had it grown in those 5 years, or was it still relatively the same as when you left it?
So when they started the playoffs, and then when I was moved to the States, they started to show, actually before I even went to the States, they started to show Monday night football on Tuesday nights in Australia. Right. So that probably started in 84. That was back when the Chicago Bears beat the New England Patriots back in those days. Were you guys even born? I'm not sure. No. That was the
No.
1985 Super Bowl. So it went from just the playoffs, or actually went from the Super Bowl to the playoffs and the Super Bowl to then Monday night football, one game a week on Tuesday night. And we would get up, we'd all get together with our mates at 11 o'clock at night on a work night, and that's how, so the NFL did start to pick up definitely from there,
Yeah.
and now we
yeah.
pay TV, it's
Yeah.
everywhere.
It's everywhere, right? It's everywhere.
4 or 5 games a week of college football. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I'm
And
too busy. Now I'm too busy to watch the NFL or college football. Too busy coaching and doing everything else. So
too busy being Paul Manera. Let's just say
yeah,
too busy. And so I guess because you mentioned it when you were talking, even when you were there in Hawaii for your first semester before you were playing, because you're waiting for the scholarship to come in. Do you think sitting there being involved but not playing, do you think that was maybe the first kind of pinpoints of your coaching career maybe starting to form the idea of it?
I had a fascination with the game, especially when I went to America, right? Because we learned things a certain way in Australia, like, okay, we're going to have the 3-back go for the 2-hole. We're going to call that run play 32, right? So what happened was when I went to the States, my mind got opened up, and so, like if you look at, say, human needs, there's the physical, the mental, the spiritual, and the social. Well, my mental need was just being stimulated, right, by what I was learning. I even took a class in junior college called like Football 101, and our head coach ran the class, which was great. And he was drawing up, coverages and stuff like that. And I thought, this is fantastic. So I developed my wanting to learn about the game at that age. And then, I'd say from that too, I think also too, out of fear, fear of not wanting to fail. And, I've got to be good at what I'm doing. I'm not the biggest guy out there. You know what I mean? So I've got to make sure that I execute very well at a high level, but also I understand my assignments and I understand like for example, like when we would fly to the mainland, we would do our exam on the plane of the game of the team we're playing against, right? And I'm not lying to you. I did 144 diagrams, right, as my offensive line test, like every game. So we'd have one play drawn up against 8 different defenses, and you'd have the circles are already there for the offensive line. And I had to draw, like if we're running spread 12, which is triple option right, I had to draw what I had to do as the right offensive tackle and the left offensive tackle, right? Every play. And I'm doing it on the plane, and I'm sitting next to a person on the plane who's not on the football team, and he's looking at me, write all the questions out and answer because we had we had questions that we had to answer as well, like sentences, and then we had all the diagrams. And so with that, like I started to like recognize patterns of play, and I started to recognize defensive fronts, and I started to create thinking of, okay, if we're going to, block this person and that person's there, we've got a combo block here to then get over there. So basically for me, it became like Boolean logic in Excel spreadsheets, like those if then else formulas, right? If condition A is true, execute condition A. If that's not true, then you execute condition B. How does that sound for you, right? So if you ever get to coach offensive line, you can talk
I
about
can
Excel spreadsheets.
I can
But you
give them
start to
sheets.
you start to learn a thought process in doing stuff. Because when you're out there, 50,000, 60,000, 70,000 people, the only time you're going to get noticed is if you miss your block, So fear drives you to go, you know what, and, and that's where, your pride comes in as well as a player, right? And
Yeah.
I hear people talk sometimes, in the modern day, how nice everyone is and how well-meaning everyone is. And they go, oh, that coach, he's a really good coach. People want to play hard for that coach. I never cared whether I liked my coach or not. What I cared about was making sure the guy across from me was not going to beat me. That's what it came down to for me,
Yeah.
right? I didn't have to play hard for the coach. No, you're not going to beat me, mate. That was it. That was my attitude. And that's, to me, I hear that, but today I hear the modern day, how they talk about that. And no. For me, it's not about that. For me, it's about, I'm here to compete, right? I'm going to do the best I can. Sometimes I'm going to lose. I used to have to block Ma'a Tanavasa at practice at the University of Hawaii. Like Ma'a, he runs the Polynesian Hall of Fame now. He was 10 years, playing defensive lineman for the Denver Broncos, I'm 255 pounds. He's 275, 280 pounds. He could bench press 470 pounds. I could only bench press 350 pounds. Sometimes I look like a Volkswagen wrapped around the telegraph pole when I was trying to block those people. But that Volkswagen went very fast and very hard every time,
Yeah.
And that's just the mindset that you have to have if you want to be a competitor. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Sometimes you're going to do the best you can, but you're going to lose. And from that, you just, that's how it is. So.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
Well, thank you for walking us through all that. That was absolutely amazing. Just to learn about you as a player and kind of the resilience and the tenacity, it was incredible. And I guess because we're now talking about your coaching, so let's talk about your coaching kind of on the international kind of stage. So
Yeah.
you've obviously kind of been there, done that, wore the t-shirt. Obviously, kind of originally we were the Australian Cycle International Gridiron team, and then we're the New South Wales Wolfpack, and obviously we coached in Japan for a little bit with the Recruit Seagulls. Like,
Yeah.
how do those opportunities just come about?
Well, with the Wolfpack, what happened was I started obviously coaching, and I was still playing in Australia when I went back, but I was coaching as well. And then what happened was I got the opportunity to go to Japan and coach for a year as the offensive line coach. So I took that on board, and I had to coach in Japanese, so they sent me to school for 6 weeks. So David Stant was a former teammate of mine at the University of Hawaii. And so Japan came over and recruited him to go back there and coach. But because I had a burning desire to come back to Australia, I went back to Australia when I finished my playing career. So then Dave called me up. I got the opportunity to coach. And that was through David and Kenny Near Matalolo, because, Kenny recommended me to David. So I went over there and coached for a year, and then came back and then started coaching I'm just trying to think now of the order. So that was 1999. But I came back in 2000, and then I started coaching the New South Wales state team, which is the Wolfpack, where I did 4 campaigns with them as a head coach, won 3 national championships. I became the Australian coach as well, and I coached the Australian men's national team in 2001. 2003, I couldn't do it. Then I coached them in 2005 and 2007 as the head coach. In 2001, we beat New Zealand 5. We beat New Zealand, and I was the head coach of the Australian men's team. We went to the World Games in Dusseldorf in Germany. We played against the German national team, and then we played against France. So did that, came back, the national team again. We lost our qualification game to Korea in 2007, and it was about that time when I was also the president of the Australian Gridiron Coaches Association. And so I'd fly around the country. There was a 406-page textbook that Football Canada had on level 1 American football, or Canadian football, sorry, where it had every position, plus it had offensive systems, defensive systems, special team systems. So I used to teach all of that. every position: quarterback, offensive line, running backs, receivers, defensive line, linebackers, defensive backs, then offensive systems, defensive systems, special team systems. That would be 8 a.m. in the morning to 6 p.m. at night on a Saturday, and then 8 a.m. in the morning to 5 p.m. at night on a Sunday. And so did that as well as coaching. And so the opportunities, I guess, probably came my way because I was doing all the work, I would say, you know.
Doing it all.
Yeah. And so, coached at the international level then. And then, from that, coached national team. And then in 2007, I started bringing on sports with my wife. And so I stepped down as being the president of the Australian Gridiron Coaches Association because I just knew this one was going to be a lot of work, So, and that was another interesting story how bringing on sports actually started. It was a bit of a fluke, really, but that's kind of international coaching. That's kind of where that started, and still stayed involved at the international level. Like I was the offensive coordinator in 2015 for Australia. We went to the World Cup in Canton, Ohio. We beat Korea and we beat Brazil. We lost to France. And that was probably the last tackle football international coaching gig that I've done. And also before that too, what else came up was the 2011, 2012. And this is where I met Jack Reed. Was obviously I met him before then. But I was on the IFAF technical committee. And then we would go to the convention every year, the AFCA convention, and meet as a technical committee to talk about stuff, football related and coaching related. And then that's where I started to meet Jack then. And then 2011, 2012, I was the offensive coordinator in 2011. And I was the offensive line coach as well. And then 2012, I was the offensive line coach for the World Under-19s youth team. We played against the USA national team. And that was a pretty awesome experience. The first year I was the OC, we lost 21-14 in Austin, Texas. And, call to play, we scored a touchdown. I thought, okay, that's cool. It was like the Predator, we draw blood. We can beat this team. We scored against them. They're not invincible. They were pretty close to invincible, but they had a lot of blue chip college football players. And then a year later, we beat them 36-29, I think, something like that. But that was an awesome thing. And that's where I got to know Jack. So I've done that. In the meantime, I was still coaching club football in Australia for the Bondi Raiders, who are now the UNSW Raiders. And then, so that's kind of all happened. And then, then I decided to start bringing on sports with my lovely wife, Melissa. And that's another story on its own. So,
Yeah.
But that's how
Is
those
that
opportunities came up,
came up? Is that kind of where, so when you kind of do bring it on sports, is that when flag kind of comes into the mix, or is that, does flag come in before that?
No, that's when flag comes into the mix for us. So Alyssa, my wife, she owned a dance school, and she sold the dance school because she wanted to work days. She didn't want to work nights anymore. And then so I then, because of my sales background, because when I came back to Australia, I'd worked a lot of sales jobs, and I said, look, if you give me a bit of product knowledge, I'm quite happy to ring a bunch of preschools for you, because she would not do that. That's beneath her. She would not call schools. Whereas she feels like I don't want to call schools, but I'm like, I don't mind calling schools. I'm one of these people, if I believe in what I'm doing, I don't mind talking about it, So I rang up all these preschools, and all of a sudden I picked her up 13 preschools to teach dancing to. And she looked at me one day and she said, why don't you teach flag football in schools, Paul? And I just looked at her and I said, I piss off. I just, I said, piss off. I said, who's going to pay for
Flag?
flag football? He goes, they pay for dancing. And I thought, okay, I'll give it a go. So I started ringing high schools, and I picked up 7 high schools to start teaching flag football in, starting 2008. And that's kind of where we started. Like, she was teaching dancing in preschools. I was teaching flag football in high schools. And then all of a sudden, schools started asking me to teach other sports. They said, oh, Paul, can you teach cricket? Okay, yeah, I can teach cricket. And then all of a sudden, more schools started booking. I thought, well, I can't be in 2 places at once. I've got to find other coaches. And I worked as an employment consultant for a company called Adecco Senecom as a, employment recruitment person. And so I had that background already. So then we started employing more casual coaches. Like on a weekly average, we now probably average about 80 coaches a week. We see around 4,000 kids a week in Australia, right?
Yeah.
And about 20% of that is flag football.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we've started to run competitions and gala days now where we see kids on a weekly basis and then we'll run a competition. So we ran a flag football gala day on the 8th of September. We had 46 teams at that gala day and they were all school teams. And none of these kids play on the weekend. They just were like, yep, I'm taking a day off school and I'm going to the gala day. And the school teacher brings the kids to the games, right? They had a fantastic time. So we've had another 2 more gala days booked. We had one in Newcastle, which is about 2 hours north of Sydney. We had 22 teams for that one. And we've got one in Wollongong on the 27th of September, which we've got about another 22 teams for that. And I'm doing another gala day in December, which is the Catholic Schools of Sydney, doing a big gala day with them on the 1st of December. And so everything that we're doing is heading in the right direction. We've been doing this now for 18 years. And so in 2023, American Football Australia, who are then called Gridiron Australia, they came up to me and they asked me, they said, Paul, look, would you guys like to run the sporting schools program for us nationally? Right. And I said, yeah, no problem. But we had to do all the work. We had to build the curriculum. I built like a 8-week curriculum and it's coaching kids, right? And it fits into the education syllabus of Australia. It's coaching kids from age 5 to age 7. Then I've got another curriculum to teach the kids from grade 3 to grade 6, and then a third curriculum for the kids in grade 7 and grade 8. And so what happens is the sporting schools get government funding to have us go in there and teach the sport of American football. So we're the exclusive provider for American Football Australia. And yeah, we've got coaches all over the country working for us. So in Sydney, we teach sports, dance, fitness, wellness, and self-defense. Outside of Sydney, we just teach flag football.
Yeah.
Right. So we designed that program and we've been doing that now for just over a year. And yeah, we're seeing lots of kids and we're growing the sport. You know, there's no doubt about it. What we're doing is growing the sport. And and that's testament like of our gala day, but we just had 46 teams at one gala day. So that's hands down the biggest event in the Southern Hemisphere for flag football. We had probably like 46 teams. They can have a minimum of 7 players per team and a maximum of 10. So let's say the average was 8. Well, what's 46 times 8? It's probably, 350 athletes there. And we had under 15s girls division and an under 18s girls division. We had an under 15s boys division, under 18 boys division. And they had a fantastic time. We had 12 flag football fields going at the same time. So, I'm just really proud of what we've been able to achieve because, we just started teaching this, off my own back and we just get callbacks year after year after year after year. We've got clients we've had for 18 years. And so, for me, I'm just very, very proud of what we've achieved. And, and I just, I owe this to, my time, playing in America. You know what I mean? Like just the resilience that we learned. Because when you're in business, it's the skill. It's not just the skill of teaching flag football. It's the skill of running a business, and scaling that company. And now we've got 7 full-time staff, because there's a lot of moving parts when you run a people's business, and so, and with that, I guess, getting a degree in business and learning business and then also learning the sport and kind of combining all of that together, it's a skill and I'm just very proud of what we've been able to achieve. And, and I'm, as far as I'm concerned, we're just going to continue to go down that pathway. And, I also thought about it growing outside of Australia as well and going into other countries and just seeing what we can do in that space, because I know that we've been helping the sport in Australia and I'm quite confident, because we've got the system set up. I'm quite confident in our ability to do that in other countries as well.
Paul, I think we're seeing so much growth around the game, and I think as we record this yesterday, there was BBC Sport actually talked not only just about how well things are going in Great Britain, but actually how things are really growing in Australia. I think LA28 getting flag football there is a fantastic milestone, but in some ways it's low-hanging fruit. You're doing it in the States, but the amount of work that's going into keeping it permanently on the agenda with Brisbane in 30. Obviously, having that pipeline of talent, kids playing it on the national curriculum, I think that's a fantastic thing. That's one of the key, I guess, enablers to really helping the sport to grow sustainably.
Yeah, no, definitely. And so, like, to me, schools is a great place to introduce the sport. We're going to the next level there where we have the 1 day competitions called Gala Days. And now what we've done now is we've started a league in Australia. We've got 110 kids in Sydney, and this is the southeast part of Sydney. It's called Shy Flag Football. If you check out our Facebook page or our Instagram page, we've got 110 kids. So we've got a league for under 10s and a league for under 12s and a league for under 14s and under 16s. And in that space, we've got 110. We didn't get many adults sign up, but I've told the adults to come down. I said, get 10 of you together. You can come down and play socially, right? And relive some glory. But I'm just so excited by it. You know, my goal is, but I want under sixes playing flag football and
Yeah.
under eight. So we had two kids who were under eight that registered. Because there wasn't enough, I've moved them up into the under 10s team. But can you imagine what those kids are going to be like by the time they're 15 years of age, right?
Yep.
They've been playing for, say, 7 years, you know, a fun game that's no contact, it's inclusive, it's simple, it's creative. Like they get to, you know, obviously I'll give them a playbook. You know, I've ordered risk coaches for them all. And I'll give them a playbook, but I'll say, hey, this is just a guide. You guys can make up your own stuff, you know? But like to me, that's where it's at. Like I've got a team of girls. They're in the under 12s. They're going to play against the boys in that competition. And you know, like to me, this is just awesome. Like this is what it's about. You know, it's
Yeah.
about creating opportunities. And I guess, you know, for me, just having good people in my life, like, you know, Fred Burson and people like that, like my parents who supported me. I just always felt like, I don't know, it just felt like if I didn't give back, I'd be doing the wrong thing. You know? Yeah, it's very, excuse me. Yeah, it's very moving for me because, like, I just know what we're doing is making a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, for
So,
sure. Because what like Dan mentions it all the time, but like part of the reason why I think flag football is so loved is because you mentioned it is it's so inclusive. Like kids that
yeah,
don't maybe fit
definitely.
into like another sport, or they don't quite fit the molds for rugby or whatever it is. Like flag is so easy to pick up.
Yeah,
Like it's not difficult. It's not complicated. Yeah, and I think it's just incredible. Like how it's just so easy, and it just means that if you don't think you fit anywhere else, you can fit in at flag, and we'll take you with an open arms.
yeah. I think too, it's you know, the strategy of the game. I think for me, that's probably one of the biggest things that's kept me involved for as long as it has too, because I love the strategy of the game, you know, the X's and O's side of it. I love the people side of it as well and the technique side of it. But I think that being that creative mind, like, you know, trying to like because you're always solving problems, whether you're an offensive coordinator or a defensive coordinator, you're always trying to find ways to solve problems. And kind of me working with Jack now in Great Britain, he's like, oh, Paul, I've got someone who I can bounce ideas off on offense. So, you know, I'm always challenging him, and, you know, every now and then he listens to me and puts in one of my ideas and makes me feel good about myself. And then sometimes it's like, yeah, thanks, Paul, you know.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're like, thank you for listening to me.
Yeah, thanks,
Because I
Jack.
guess, yeah, I guess for anybody who doesn't know, Paul is the offensive assistant coach and scouting lead for Great Britain women's national flag football team, and obviously we've had a very exciting couple of months with them. As you know, they were fifth in the World Games in
Yeah.
2025. So what was that? What was that experience like on like that huge global stage for them?
Yeah, look, it was really good. I think the girls, you know, they did a fantastic job. And I think, like, if you look at the World Games and then look at the European Games, European Championships, I think the World Games helped them to win the European Championships because, you know, what we say, right? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. You know, like we beat Japan, right? So Japan's ranked third in the world. We beat them. Then we come up against Mexico, you know, notably the best team in the world right now. You know, and at half time, it's even. I think we're 1 point down, you know, so we played a good first half against Mexico. And what we needed to do is to keep working on like resilience, keep working on focus, keep working on closing the gap. And then second half, we struggled a bit against Mexico, you know, and then we didn't have our best performance against Austria in Germany. You know, like we started off kind of a bit slow. We missed a few passes, missed a few catches, dropped a couple of interceptions. We ended up losing that game 40-28, right? But that's the moments where you win right there. That's the penny drop moments. Okay, what didn't we do well? Why didn't we do well? And then we go up against China, right? And China, then we, struggle against Italy, beat them, I think in overtime, I think it was, or just before overtime, I can't remember. And then we come up against China. China beats Japan, and then we go out there and we kick, China pretty well. And we played pretty well against them. Well, what did we learn from that? How come we struggled against Austria, kind of, had a hard game against Italy, then all of a sudden we come out and beat China, who beats Japan, right? And so I think we learn about preparation, we learn about focus, we learn about because it's tough in those games. You got to get through 7, 8 games. The players start to get tired. The coaches, eyeballs are starting to hang out of our heads, you know what I mean? Because we're tired watching film and whatnot. And kind of like, there's that, what we call the law of diminishing returns. Yeah. There's no point trying to teach people when they're not in a good learning environment, and what I mean, I don't mean the learning environment from the coaches to the players. I mean, like if they're really tired and they're fatigued and there's stuff like that, is it better off just saying, hey, listen, get a good night's rest. We can catch up with you in the morning. Like one night in Euros, I came home and my eyes are hanging out of my head. And I said to Jack, I said, mate, I'm falling asleep at the computer. I'm going to go to sleep. I'll get up in the morning and I'll watch the film of that team. And that's what we did,
And Paul, I think that's something that you really screamed out to me all the way through this. You talked about resilience in tough times, and I guess the World Games, a 5th place finish to someone looking at that from the outside thinks, okay, that's 5th out of 8. It's okay. And of course, I think everyone would probably want to do better, but this was arguably the 8 teams in the world, of which GB is a part of that. And I think the other thing to factor in there is that I think just under half the squad there are actually making their debut at that level of competition. You've got Hannah Elliott, you've got Josh Abed, you've got Laura Carter, Abby, and of course the quarterback, Jess Allen, who's only been playing the sport for 2 years, playing at that level of competition to start their careers. It's a tough ask, but what better preparation so they can go into a Euros campaign?
Yeah, definitely. Like I think the way the girls have handled it's been outstanding. And, they talk about resilience and they talk about being intentional, when we do things. And this is the culture that they've set together themselves, players, coaches combined, everyone being aligned. And, obviously, like fear plays a big part in sport, right? And if you fear like the wrong way, all of a sudden you can't play the same way. If you go into a game worried about making a mistake, you're going to freeze. And if you're playing on defense, you can't play frozen. You have to move when you play defense. Defense is a game of reaction and anticipation. Offense is a game of, okay, we're going to run this play and we might adjust it if the defense does stuff. But especially on defense, you got to really know what you're doing because the game of flag football really favors offense, right? And so sometimes when you're not flowing, right, when you're not in a flow state, you can't react the same way. You're going to react late and things are going to happen a bit late. So part of that is, part of that nervousness and, not feeling confident. These things play a big part psychologically in players. And so like our job as coaches is to put our players in the best position to win, psychologically, right, is a big part of it, but also strategically. We want to make sure that we're asking them to do things that helps them to, contribute to the victory. Right. And so, so that's a big part of it. And so I felt like against Austria in that game, it's obviously the nervousness kicks in and we probably were a little bit like mentally not as sharp, because, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because like when you have anxiety, right. Or when you have, sometimes if you're not calm inside your brain, what happens is then you don't think as well on your feet. You know what I mean? That kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? That kind of like, if you're not calm, sometimes it helps you don't process things the same way. And so you have to be aggressive, right? And you have to be calm, right? So I call it assassin mentality. Yeah. Right. You got to be able to take the shot, when you have to take the shot. So for example, but if you're too hesitant, like as a quarterback, right? if you're going to wait for that receiver to come open, you might get sacked. Whereas if you know the receiver's going to get open by the time they get to that point, I'm going to throw that receiver open. That's that assassin mentality, because you've got the anticipation, you've got the calmness, you can diagnose, you can process, and you can make the play happen. You know what I mean? But if you're too frazzled in your mind, you're not going to see things the same way. It affects your thinking. It affects your ability to process. Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we think about specifically the Euros final. You had, I think, Emily Kemp catching a touchdown in double league. You had
Yeah.
Marta catching the ball on her head, which I think we actually, commentators actually called it a touchdown, just set us up for that crucial overtime touchdown. But like you say, it's having the confidence as a quarterback to know that you have the teammates around you that will make those plays in those critical
Yeah.
moments.
And I think that's the key. Like, so when you're calm, and when I mean calm mentally, that you can still process stuff, that helps you perform in the big moments. And sometimes players, they get caught up in the game. We're playing France. They just beat Italy 42-6, right? They've got the crowd behind them. They're the favorites, like they just, and so you can get caught up into that, or you can just focus on your job, right? And that's, to me, and that's the beautiful thing about playing sport, is that, what you learn on the field, you can actually take that into your day life as well. There's a lot of stuff going wrong, especially in this day and age. There is so much noise, right? There's so much social media. There's so many distractions. Like when we were young, we had a couple of rules. When the lights come on, make sure you come home for dinner. Our parents were like, yeah, good, out of the house. I don't have to see you for a few hours. Now it's hard to get the kids out of the house because they've got all these distractions on social media. And so there's a lot of noise out there. And the key, and I heard a speech once with Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, and they said, what's your most important word in the world? And they said, focus. And I strongly believe in that. Focus helps, takes you away from fear. Focusing on your job and your task, and you lock out all the noise, nothing else matters. And I feel like that's how you get in that state of flow, when you play sport at a high level, and and I just feel like that's what our girls, and what I love about our girls is they're doing that, but they're having fun along the way. And I think the fun that they have, it keeps them calm. It distracts them from anxiety and all those other negative factors that can come in there. So that's why I feel like the World Games is good for us, because we had some good moments in the World Games, and we had some moments where we probably didn't play as good as we could. And then it's kind of like analyzing the reason why. And then, we played China that final game. We come out there and we're feeling really good. And I could feel it before the game. You could just have that feeling, yep, the girls feel good. They feel confident. I can tell that they're focused, right? And they're going to play well today, And so we go out and play China, have a good win against them. And then I think all of that stuff started to carry through, so that when we got to the Euros, we had some tough times, but we kept our head together. I think we were down 21-6 to Austria in the final at one stage, right? And so, being able to, I think, stay calm and focus on our job and stuff like that, I think keeps everyone grounded, and good result happened, So very happy with the girls. I'm very proud of them, actually.
Yeah.
So very proud to be part of it. Very grateful, to Jack and them for allowing me to be part of that, because it was really special.
Yeah, and I think that's genuinely what you're saying, because I know, Sarah jokes about, how I'm particularly passionate about flag. I think actually one of our greatest successes is how we've converted Sarah into a flag fan, because
I was watching the World Games on an airplane coming back from Salt Lake City. That's how much I was involved
There you go.
in these girls, yeah.
I'm surprised myself as well, because even though I taught flag football in schools for 18 years, like I was just teaching kids how to play. I wasn't really getting strategical with them. It was more about teaching them the skills and the rules of the game, and then they can go out there and call their own plays. So when I started to coach international flag, I still had to learn, because, these are the defenses they run in international flag. This is the blitzer. These are the blitzing strategies that they have. So I had to learn about that. And so I was actually quite surprised, because when you coach in the tackle football world, you think, well, okay, tackle football is way more complicated than flag football, right? There's helmets, there's blocking schemes, there's all this stuff going on, there's all these coverages. Flag football, surely that's simple, right? But it's not. It's a different game, and strategically you have to learn the game and you've got to study the game just like you do tackle football. But I'm actually really loving flag football now. I think the reason is because it's stimulating my mind. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of different type of offenses you'll see in flag football that you won't have to necessarily defend against in tackle football. So, but the two sports help each other. Like there's concepts that I take from tackle football and I apply it to flag football, and probably more so from tackle to flag than flag to tackle. But at the same time too, there's things that you can do in tackle football which just won't work in flag football, because the quarterback doesn't have the same amount of time to set up to throw the ball.
And I think that's the great thing, because we've talked about how accessible the sport of flag is, and how people can get involved at a young age. But at the other end of the scale, at the elite end of the scale, what we're starting to see is people are now talking about individual players. They're talking about schemes. They're talking about plays and moments. I mean, with the World Games, I remember seeing people, they're talking about that final between USA and Mexico, and should the US have scored with 20 seconds to go, talking about key decisions like that, people breaking down, do you send the blitz, do you send even a double blitz, when you've got multiple quarterbacks. There's all these different things that I think people think that flag is just this kind of spin-off of people following the NFL, but actually no, there is this rich game with strategy and controversy, and stars are really starting to develop out of it, and it's just a really exciting time.
Yeah, look, I can see the day. Like, if you look at the American Football Coaches Association, like, I'm sure it's not in a not too distant future, you're going to see like flag football coaches presenting there and having flag football breakout sessions. And it needs to be done because I think the world wants to get better at flag football. And I think people, like we got approached by some coaches from other countries while we're in Europe. They said, we'd love to come over and like learn, and like when I started coaching flag, one of the first guys I spoke to was Jack, and he looked at my playbook. He goes, "Paul, that looks like a typical tackle football playbook." Thanks, Jack. That's what happens. It's that evolution from tackle to flag from a coaching perspective, but also what's going to happen now is the professionalism of flag, especially with the NFL announcement that they're going to start their own professional flag football league, which I do believe will happen. And then you've got the Olympics driving it now, which is, once you're in the Olympics, that's all about high performance, right? And I think, playing at the international level, that's all about high performance. And what's going to happen is, strategies, and it's just going to become a forever growing, evolving game, just like tackle football is. If you turn on and watch the NFL in the 80s, right, you're probably going to see 4 down linemen, yeah, and then you'll probably see 2 outside linebackers standing outside of the defensive lineman on the line of scrimmage, right? Right, but since then, there's been so much more throwing and passing in the game. Usually the linebackers now, all of them are usually 5 yards back, for example, right? So the sport evolves and it changes, and it's a cat and mouse game. The offense is trying to get one up on the defense. The defense is trying to annoy everyone as usual and try to, destroy everything. So they're trying to, and so the game evolves. And I think, like I'm starting now in my head to start to define things like, okay, single quarterback plays, double quarterback plays, under center plays, shotgun plays, right? Triple quarterback plays, right? Okay, when they're under center, what plays do they run under center versus what plays do they run on offense when they're in shotgun? And then obviously the other basics, such as, mismatches, which athletes they have. But all of this comes into play, and, and I think the sport's constantly evolving, and it's going to evolve a lot. It's going to evolve so quick that as people are developing this strategy, some people are already jumping ahead with a different strategy who don't necessarily know about this strategy.
Oh,
There's going to be a lot of that stuff, and then it's going to level out, and at the moment, I think you're going to have 16 countries going to the World Cup. You've got another 3 countries still to be determined in Asia. I just think the evolution of it's just going to continue to evolve.
And I think you've maybe made a perfect link for us, because it's been a really exciting and busy couple of months for you with the World Games and the European Championships. But as you said, next up, we have the Asia Oceania Championships, which is a part of the world that you're very familiar with. And as you said, obviously, 3 spots going for the World Championships. So I guess we probably don't have the time to do an in-depth preview of that tournament, but what are you kind of expecting to see in China?
Well, obviously, you've got your A pool and your B pool in China, and then you've got your O pool for Oceania. We don't know a lot about American Samoa. What I've been told about American Samoa is that they're allowed to have people on their team that have USA passports, right? So, to me, there will be a good chance that team will have experienced flag football players on their team. New Zealand came third at the last Asia Oceania Championships. They got put into a tough group in Finland last year, so they didn't play out of their group. They didn't get to the top 16. From my understanding, they're doing good things in New Zealand. They've been playing flag football internationally longer than what Australia have. I've been told that they're getting athletes in from other sports as well who have come in to their pool of players, and I've been told that their team's looking pretty good. With the Australian team, they've gone through a lot of change with their players, and so they've gotten athletes in from other sports. And so I guess time will tell when they have the championship in Oceania, but my understanding is that they'll play each other twice. And then from that, the top team in Oceania will play the top team in Asia. That's for the gold and silver medal. Both of those teams will qualify for the World Cup as well. And then the second place team in Asia will play the second place team in Oceania. And the winner of that game will also go through to the World Cup as the wildcard entry.
And it's going to be really interesting to see how that goes because, we've talked about a few of the teams there, but of course you have Japan, who the world's had such an innovative playbook, both in the men's and the women's side. Then we've seen China, who were a mystery going into the World Games and actually came out all guns blazing. They got a victory over Japan. So it'll be interesting to see how their women kick on. And of course, what their men's team looks like as well, playing at home. Only 3 spots going for the World Championships. I think there's going to be some real fierce competition.
There will be. There's going to be, and it's going to be great because like those countries that we played against in Asia in 23, a lot of those countries have been, trying to get better and improve. So like everyone loves to, I guess, judge your nation based on how they perform at the World Cup or international playing. So a lot of times, people don't see what's going on in the background. They just look at the end result. The end result is, this team finished number 1 in Asia, and so, but there's a lot of stuff going on in the background which a lot of people wouldn't know about. And so like with China, for example, been told that Pat Ali, who was the former head coach of the USA men's team in Finland, he's now the head coach of China. I've also been told, I don't know if it's 100% true or not, that the Japanese coaches, they've got a couple of the Japanese coaches coaching with them. So they're obviously they're taking it very seriously. I think the Chinese team's actually in Dallas at the moment for about a month there in preparation to come over to, Oceania. And so this is the effect that the Olympic Games is having on the sport, right? And it's going to continue to happen. It's going to continue to evolve. Like, countries, it's going to, like I can't remember what year it was. I think it was the 2000 Olympics in Australia. They said, but every gold medal that Australia won cost the government $20 million per gold medal, right? And we're sitting here, we're going, what, our sport? You know what I mean? Yeah. But it's going to happen to our sport, and that's that's what's going to happen. People, once you attach the 5 rings to your sport, it changes everything. Yeah. And that's, at the moment, it's still only a demonstration sport, for Los Angeles. And then obviously you've got Brisbane 32 they're going to be watching. And I think that, this is the evolution of the sport of flag football. And then, you've got the NFL who are probably going to have a professional league. So the whole thing's going to just evolve and the sport will look quite different probably 3 years from now than it is now, and so, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very exciting time to be a fan of pretty much anything to do with American football. Yeah. But I guess to bring us kind of round to a close, Paul, this has been an absolutely incredible episode. So thank you again for joining us. But I have 2 hard questions for you, and I do apologise because they will be difficult questions. I'd like to know, in your entire career from being a player to now, what you're most proudest of, and then if you could give any kid watching or listening to this advice about how to make it in even anything, not even just in football, in soccer, in rugby, whatever, what advice would you give them?
Okay. I think for me, yeah, I think obviously I'm very proud to have received a scholarship to the University of Hawaii. I think that's something that, has really helped set me up for the rest of my life. And the lessons that I learned from doing that. And also, that's obviously as a player, but as a coach, obviously coaching in the world under 19s team when we beat the USA was a pretty special moment. And obviously the national championships that I've won, as a coach in Australia, I've won 3 for tackle and I've won 1 for flag this year with my under 17s boys team. So they're probably the things that really, stick out, for me, coaching wise. And I think, as a player, like as a coach for any young kid out there is, just back yourself, don't ever quit. Like you might make a mistake, you might lose a game, that to me is just a learning opportunity, and don't take it to heart. To me, you only fail when you quit on yourself. Yeah. And a lot of times we see, kids quit on themselves. And like when I go to schools, I say to the girls and to the boys for a joke, I'll say, hey, look, don't worry if you can't do it. I'm not going to put it on YouTube, so you're all safe here. You know what I mean? Like if they're too scared to learn how to throw the ball and stuff like that, because they're always worried about what other people think of them, and I would say, don't worry about what other people think about you. Like focus on, you're going to trip over. Some people might laugh at you. Some people might doubt you because they doubt themselves, right? And that's happened to me as well. Like people who doubted themselves, they didn't think I'd even play junior college, and then they're hugging me when they found out I got a scholarship to the University of Hawaii. And so, be strong within yourself, back yourself, believe in yourself, and, just be prepared. But if you want to do something in life, you got to be willing to pay the price, which is called sacrifice. Yeah. You got to be willing to do that. And that's a big part of it, and so don't doubt yourself. Don't worry about what other people think. As long as you know in your heart and in your mind that you're a good person and you're trying to do things, whatever, you've got to back yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great advice. Even just not even for sport, but just in general. You just got to show up for yourself and continue to show up for yourself even when it gets difficult.
Yeah.
But yeah, Paul, it's been fantastic having you on our podcast. Thank you so much for sharing all of your journey with us. It's been a great morning for us and hopefully a great evening for you.
Sorry for getting a little bit emotional back there, but it's hard, like things just,
yeah, of course. It just
my
shows
players,
it just shows the passion and the drive, and that's exactly what we're here to talk about and share with everybody. Yeah. But Gav, thanks so much for joining me in the chair as well this morning.
Absolutely, it's been an amazing story. Really, Paul, appreciate your candor, and all these years after writing the letter, next year you do get your NFL game in Australia, so there's that too.
Yeah, that'll be great. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to that. And my gut feeling is they're going to have like 105, 110,000 people at that game. And I think it's going to be fantastic, for the sport to kind of come full circle, to where you're watching a game once a year, the Super Bowl till now, but the NFL's coming out here to play. And I think it'll be a special moment and great for the fans as well.
Yeah. And we're hoping that Paul's ticket is in the post for that game. All those years ago. I bet you will. Yes, I bet you will. For sure. So to everyone watching or listening, make sure to follow us on Instagram and our TikTok for all the latest content. You can find all our previous episodes on YouTube and on all major podcast platforms. So hit that subscribe button and stay connected. And until next time, we will see you soon.